Belinda Tiffen here, University Librarian, who is going to share her thoughts and insights as a professional working as a PhD in Macquarie. Thanks for joining us today, Belinda. We're delighted to have you here. You seen the shout out in the newsletter, and we were delighted to have you reach out to us and tell us that you would love to participate in one of our webinars today. Actually, before I move on, remiss of me, I should start with an acknowledgement as well. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Watamachigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So with that, Belinda, would you like to kick off? It's up to you how you'd like to do this. Either you can show some slides, share your screen. It's up to you, or we'd like to prefer to talk us through your experiences. I have some questions here that we posed to you to prepare for today's webinar, but let us know how you want to run this.
Okay, well, let me see if I can share my screen. I've got a few slides, I guess, just to talk you through a few initial thoughts, and then really happy to open up to questions and discussions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let me see if I can share my screen here. I should be able to as co-host.
I should hope so.
Okay.
Yay.
There we go, I think.
Awesome.
Get rid of that. So I'm hopeless with PowerPoint, much more a Mac user normally, but here we go. Can you see the screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, looks amazing.
Okay, so my PhD was on this guy, Sir John Suckling, who is a admittedly minor poet of the English Civil War period, although he's looking quite magnificent there in his portrait by Anthony van Dyck. My thesis was a sort of socio-political reading of his poetry and dramatic works to explore the political and religious ideologies behind the English Civil War, and to argue that the period was a little more complex, perhaps politically, than it is sometimes viewed. While the kind of question I got doing this was some variation of what are you going to do with that, or with the implication sometimes I think of what are you going to do when you grow up. And, you know, fair question, what are you going to do with a deep expertise in a minor Caroline poet? What I ended up doing with it was this, a career in academic librarianship. I've worked in a couple of academic libraries, the National Library, in a variety of roles, but I've ended up here at Macquarie starting in January as the university librarian. And it's been interesting, challenging, and all those things, I guess, that you want a new job to be, and I'm absolutely loving it. So when I was talking to Sally and Catherine about this session, you know, they sort of posed questions to me about, well, what does your job involve? What does a normal day look like? Who do you work with? And that kind of created a bit of an existential crisis that made me wonder, well, what do I do? What is my job? What am I doing here? This is the list I came up with. This is what I think I'm supposed to be doing anyway. The University Librarian at Macquarie is responsible for both the library and the art gallery. So I guess ultimately what I'm responsible for is setting the strategic direction for the library and gallery, thinking about what our priorities are, where we should be heading over both the short and the long term. A big part of my responsibilities are our collections. We have an amazing art collection, actually, and a very deep, rich library collection, of course, mostly acquired digitally these days. And so that's a big part of my role, making sure we're acquiring those materials with the correct probity, that they're managed in an appropriate fashion, and that they continue to meet the needs of the Macquarie community for learning and research. I believe really strongly that the library has an educational and an instructional role in the learning and research life of the university. So we don't just passively collect materials and then say, there you go. Our job is to help people find information, to connect to knowledge, to use information efficiently and ethically. So all those things about copyright, intellectual property, academic integrity, all of those are part of our remit in helping people use information effectively, particularly in digital formats. So what we would term digital and information literacy skills, which hopefully all adds up to a successful journey for students at Macquarie, but also skills that they can take into the workplace. So I think that's an important part of my role. One of the really interesting things about working in academic libraries is you don't just focus on research and you don't just focus on the learning and teaching side of things, that it is really a 50-50 split of time and effort. So there's a big part of the role which is around thinking through how the library supports Macquarie's research endeavours. And I think particularly libraries have a responsibility around helping to share research outputs and make those available, because ultimately that's why we're doing research. So it's out there in the world that other people can build on what we know, what we publish, so that the rate of research and new discoveries is accelerating all the time. And it's getting translated out into society, to business, into making actual real positive change. That's, I think, part of a core mission of a library, and one of the reasons I've continued to work in academic libraries for more years than I'm going to admit to, actually. It makes me feel very old. And I think another really important part of my role is custodianship of what is a pretty amazing library building. This is, quite a special, unique building, not just on campus, but I think amongst academic libraries across Australia. We also have an amazing gallery space down in the Chancellery, which I've included in the slides there. And if you do need a moment sometimes out of your research, I'd encourage you, once we are able to reopen after the current restrictions, that you visit the gallery down there. So I think there's a role there about making sure that those are safe, welcoming spaces, and that they're spaces that are really conducive to learning and scholarship. So that's, I think, what I am doing here. What that translates into the day-to-day is really varied, really diverse, and that's part of what I really like about my job. But I thought, trying to think about this in terms of, well, what do I do and how do I use the skills from my PhD here when there's no real obvious connection between, an obscure Caroline poet and an academic library and gallery. So the way I approached this was to really just flick through my diary for the last couple of days, see some of the meetings and projects I've been working on, and try and reflect a little bit about how I use some of those transferable skills from my PhD in my day-to-day life. So, a kind of random selection in some ways, but I've been talking to various groups, different colleagues around campus, about e-research and research data at Macquarie. As researchers, I'm sure you're very aware that there's kind of a shifting focus away from just thinking about the final outputs of your research to a focus on your research data and its enduring value. So thinking about how you're sharing that, how you can preserve that data beyond the life of your current project, and how you might make that available for others to use. So those are ongoing discussions, and obviously doing all of that requires policies to be in place, it requires technical infrastructure to be in place. So there's various groups around campus all thinking about how we are developing this direction for Macquarie. So for me, the kind of skills that I need to apply that are very much things I developed as part of my own research are just communication skills. You're dealing with different people, bringing different perspectives. Those kind of communication skills are critical, and I think they have their seed in those early research. Also, I think just an understanding of the academic environment. I think one of the advantages of being a professional staff who has done their own research project is it does give you some understanding of, you know, the research mindset, the pressures researchers are working under, and how that broader academic environment is working, and working in an empathetic way, I think. I've also been attending some discussions around transformational licensing, and I won't go too deep into this because it's a whole topic on its own. But basically, within the library sector, there's a body of thought that says the way we acquire our digital materials, the journals and ebooks you get to use in your research, works really well for the publishers, doesn't work so well for us as libraries and for our clients, and that we really want to change the business models so information is much more freely available and open. So that's what transformational licensing is about in a nutshell. So I've had some discussions with colleagues and peers at other universities around Australia about those in the last week or two. And I think a lot of the skills that I'm applying here, as this is a fairly new sort of area that we're investigating, are just those really fundamental research and information seeking skills. What else is happening in this space? Who is working in this area? And then analysing and synthesising that knowledge. These are the fundamental cores, I think, of doing any PhD, but they're skills which then you call upon, I think, almost daily. Certainly I know I do in my profession. On a completely different tack, I've also been looking at collection storage and our long-term storage needs. Particularly artworks have, very specific requirements about how you store them, and I've got to confess I have come with zero knowledge and background in curatorship, so I'm needing to pick this up very fast. But again, I think, the kind of transferable skills you get in your PhD really do help when you find yourself in those situations of going, I don't actually, this is not my domain of knowledge. So a lot of it comes down to project management skills, and a PhD is very much, a project that you have to manage over multiple years. And I think those skills become really critical that you can apply again and again. And also those critical thinking and problem solving skills, you encounter those all the time throughout your PhD. You constantly hit, dead ends or impasses in your research that you need to work your way around. And I think those skills get, again, things you just apply daily. And the final thing I've been, working on at the moment, we've just started session 2. It looks very different to what sessions normally look like. We're in this weird hybrid model of some people back on campus, some people still studying and working remotely. So a lot of discussions about how we deliver services in this hybrid environment. And I think here, there are a lot more experts, a lot more knowledgeable people I work with in the library who can do this work. I don't need and probably shouldn't get involved. I'll just be in the way. But, those leadership skills of stepping back and just coordinating and allowing people to get on and use their expertise are critical. And again, I think sometimes you don't think about yourself as developing leadership skills when you're doing a PhD, but I think you actually are developing all the time. And particularly, I think if you're taking those opportunities to do things like get involved in networks, conference organising, co-authoring papers, etc. All of those bring to bear leadership skills that you're constantly working on and evolving with. So that's, I guess, kind of a little snapshot of my last week anyway, and some of the opportunities, I guess, to be applying the things I've learnt about throughout my own research and applying those in my own professional career here at Macquarie. So I will probably stop there, maybe stop sharing my screen and open up to questions and discussions, if that's okay.
That's great, Belinda. Thanks very much. I love how you focused on transferable skills. Something that Sally and I both feel very strongly about is understanding where these things that you're currently doing, even though, you know, you're focused on a very specific area of research, how the whole PhD is bringing you to your next stage in your career. So just a comment in that regard. I loved how actually you mentioned there the curatorship is new. I actually never understood that the university librarian was responsible for the art gallery. So that's a whole big job in itself. I hope you have some support in that area.
We have a very experienced, very good curator who, thank God for that. But yes, and slightly unusual, I guess, it's not often organised that way in university. So it's, you know, it's a unique part of the job. It's a really interesting part of the job, but it does have a steep learning curve behind it.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to touch on a few things here that you raised, and then some stuff that you said to us beforehand. But while we're maybe talking on that, please feel free to put your hand up or put something in the chat there to if you have questions for Belinda about what her current role is and her journey to this position. Something that I realized as you put it in your this week profile, you might have, if others might have seen this as well in February, that Belinda was featured in this week. But you mentioned you're doing for fun at the moment an ancient history degree, and that's going to win you some friends, I think, in the Faculty of Arts there.
Yes, I've been wending my way through an embarrassingly long degree in ancient history. I think I'm in about my 9th year part-time, but this, with fingers crossed, if I can complete my last 2 subjects, will be the degree done and dusted.
That's amazing. And what brought you to that? You must obviously have a passion or an interest in that area.
A lifelong interest in ancient history, and particularly Egyptology, and something I always wanted to study and finally have come back to, purely for love and enjoyment of learning in the subject.
Good stuff. We have a question there in the chat. It doesn't say who exactly it is. I just see an MQID. Can you compare how Macquarie perceived your PhD background with that of non-academic organisations?
Interesting question. I think that the qualification is a definite point of difference, and I guess in some ways a foot in the door. Obviously it depends on the area you're in, but often in professional staff areas, a PhD is not a common qualification to bring. So it does help you, I guess, at least in those initial stages, stand out. I also think, though, it is useful when you're meeting with researchers, when you're having discussions and conversations. It helps you build relationships, build rapport, and it does help you come with some empathy to conversations. That said, it's a university. There are a lot of smart people, of people with PhDs. It doesn't particularly help that much, but I think in those initial stages, it's definitely an advantage.
Yeah, we do hear that quite a bit, from people like yourselves, like as a professional working in the space now, having that qualification does, I don't want to say credibility, but adds just kind of an understanding, as you said, an empathy for researchers currently doing the same qualification, and being around a lot of people who are academics in leadership positions as well. We have a question there from Elizabeth. What was it that made you apply for your current position? Was it an alignment in transferable skills or an area of interest?
There's probably a lot of factors, as there usually are, I suppose, when you're applying for a position. Part of it was I was already studying at Macquarie, so I knew it as a student. I liked, from the student perspective anyway, I liked the culture that I saw. It did feel like a genuinely student-focused environment, and I liked that a lot, and that really aligned with, I guess, my own professional and personal ethics. I think it was the scope of the role. It's an amazing building. It's an amazing collection to be a custodian of. It does have the gallery as a point of interest. And I guess I saw Macquarie as somewhere that, you know, as a slightly newer university, perhaps was on a growth trajectory and was perhaps more open to change and innovation than some other places are. And that, again, that really appealed. So it was probably more an alignment of personal ethics and a cultural fit for me. Obviously, the feeling, you know, that there were transferable skills was really important in the sense of feeling confident that I could do the job. You know, that was, I guess, an important factor as well. But it was really about the culture and the people, I think, more than anything.
Good stuff. Thanks. Great question. Good stuff. We have another question there from Lee. Thanks for your wonderful sharing, Lee says. Did you have library work experience or internship before along the way?
Yes. So I'm coming here from probably quite a long career now in mostly academic libraries. Probably the genesis of that was actually my PhD. I found myself not really wanting to pursue a career in academia, but very interested in the process of research and the process by which, because I was doing historical research, archives and information was saved, preserved, and then still discoverable. And at that time, it was an early stage of things like digital humanities, so that transfer of materials into the digital world. So I got very interested in that as its own topic. So when I finished my PhD, I went and did a grad dip at Curtin University, which I think was grandly titled Information Management and Knowledge. I can't even remember what the qualification was anymore, but basically librarianship. And have worked through a couple of different academic libraries over in UWA in Perth there, National Library for a number of years, and before this I was at University of Technology in Sydney. So yeah, worked in libraries for quite some time in a range of different roles.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And something that you touched on there was when that you knew that you said you didn't want to have an academic career. How did that kind of come about? Did you have conversations with your supervisor at that time? How did they respond to that? I'm wondering.
I did have conversations with my supervisor about that. I was very lucky. I had a great supervisor who was really diligent about making sure I got lots of opportunities as a budding researcher. So, you know, made sure I got research assistant work, encouraged me to apply for conferences, gave me some tutoring and marking work. So I really got a sense of the gamut, the work. I think, you know, partly was just that I went straight from undergrad and honours to a PhD. So I think I felt in part I just wanted to have some experiences beyond academia and round myself out a little professionally and personally. So that was part of the thinking, which my supervisor, I think, did understand. Also, if I'm really, really honest, I think some aspects of probably the marking and things like that I wasn't, you know, loving. But there was no final decision. I think, you know, early on I thought I might go back to it, but I got on a particular professional course and really, you know, discovered I guess, you know, it's a cliche, but a real passion for that, that work and a real belief that it has value and was something I wanted to keep doing.
Awesome. It's good that you had a positive conversation about it, because we know it can be hard sometimes to, you know, be able to be open about, you know, maybe your hopes and dreams if it doesn't involve an academic career. So good to hear that was positive and you got lots of opportunities to broaden your skill set at that time. So we have a few more questions there. Thanks everybody for adding. Do you still do research in your PhD area? And if so, does your role accommodate that activity?
I'm not active in 17th century literature much anymore, but I do still research, more in my professional area now. And I've been, again, very lucky, I think, throughout my career that even as a professional staff member, I've always found that to be well supported. And I think there's been an understanding that research even where you might have an area of personal interest, does underpin my work and my role and add depth to my knowledge. So it's been very supported there.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's good to be able to continue, I suppose, those skills, those research skills, and again, in your area, that's always going to pay back, to be researching what you're actually working in. Awesome. And next question, Belinda from Lee. From your point of view, which one is more important for job application as a librarian? Work experience or publications or social relationships?
It's a good question. I would say it's probably changed over my career, to be honest. I think early in my career, it was the qualifications, the publications, track record, which was most important. Obviously, as I've gone on and gained work experience, I think, that is something I stress myself more in my own applications, and probably something that carries more weight. One of the interesting things, though, about this role is, as Universal Librarian, of course, you're not interviewed and you're not appointed by another librarian. So your appointment is all based on people who don't actually know your professional area. So that in itself is an interesting act of translation, of thinking through who is actually going to appoint you to the position, and what you need to highlight for them, because in some senses in that, in this particular instance, working experience, it did have value, but a lot of what I was probably saying and, the detailed examples wouldn't actually translate, because it's very deep in my own profession. So it's about broadening that out. And that's where I think, qualifications, publications, yes, those networks become important. And again, I think those transferable skills, because they're what you're highlighting then.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, the networking, it's really interesting what you've said there in terms of who's on the panel. You really don't know, but it's not going to be a whole panel of librarians. So yeah, really good to keep that in mind. We have a question here from Ritzio. Thank you for this great opportunity to meet you, Belinda. Did you ever talk openly with your PhD supervisor about your intention to not pursue an academic career? If yes, how did you approach this? We did touch on it a little bit, but would you like to add anything more to what you were saying? Because from what you said, it sounded like it was a very open discussion, and it wasn't a secret, I suppose. Or did we miss? No,
I think I probably broached it later into my candidature. Obviously, early on, I myself didn't really know what I was doing. So I think by the time it really came up, it was a good relationship. It was a well-established relationship. Looking back, I can see that my supervisor worked very hard at building a trusting, open relationship. I think at the time I probably wasn't as aware of how difficult PhD supervision can be, and how hard a good supervisor actually works to build that rapport. But in retrospect, I'm hugely grateful for it. And I guess part of my advice to anyone is to make sure you yourself are putting in the effort, the reciprocal effort, to build that relationship. So when it came time for those discussions, it was actually really open. It was very friendly. There was no drama or stress about that. I think, like any good supervisor, he just wanted the best outcomes for me. And so, I think once we had those conversations, and it was very clear that I had thought through my options, and that I was doing this in a very positive manner. It wasn't a sort of negative kind of, I don't think I'm going to get an academic role, so I better go second best. It was actually a positive choice. I think it was, it was a very good, very open conversation.
Yeah, well, that's good. Good to hear. Thank you for that. From some of the things you said in terms of leadership skills, in terms of transferability and growing them over time, especially in your position now, I wonder how you might have approached people management when you realise maybe this is something that as part of this role is really important, and you know, maybe your approach to developing those skills. As you said, the PhD does allow you to you know, start building on those skills. But how, I suppose, you're using them now in your professional career.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this role is there are a lot of experts working in the library. They often know their particular area much better than I do. And so I think, you know, actually one of the challenges probably is in leadership is letting go a little bit, not trying not to micromanage. You'd have to ask my staff whether I do micromanage. I think I probably do sometimes. But, you know, I think it becomes a lot about relationship management, people management, identifying talent, identifying people's expertise, and trying to ensure that people feel supported and empowered to, you know, to be innovative, to be creative, to use their skills, to bring those to bear. And leadership almost becomes, in some ways, I think, but as an enabler type role. You know, I have experts who can come up with great ideas, new services. They know what they need to do. I need to enable and create an environment where they can thrive. So that's, you know, it's part of both the challenge and the excitement of the role. On the one hand, sometimes you really want to, you know, dive in and do something yourself, but it's really exciting to try and support other people to, you know, to achieve and to deliver what I hope are really good services.
Yeah, totally. I think, you know, maybe early in career, you know, as you say, the micromanagement, you know, can sometimes be, you know, I have to be on top of everything. But as you grow the role or time takes on, you just realize people are going to do their best. You know, you got to trust and, you know, enable, as you say. So yeah, good reflection. We have a question from Melissa. As someone working in the library sphere, are there courses or subjects that are highly prized for those looking to enter into the librarianship field?
This is quite a sort of timely topic in some ways, because I think traditionally the path has been that you would do a library degree, generally a grad dip after an undergrad, and, you know, traditionally a lot of professional library positions actually, you know, will require that qualification. A couple of things are happening. I think there's less library degrees around, and the work is becoming more diverse. Certainly there's a greater reliance on technology, for example. I spoke a little bit before about, you know, research data, and data is becoming, you know, part of the remit of libraries. It's not about, you know, the traditional management of books and collections in that sense anymore. It's about different formats. So those technical and digital skills become, you know, much more important. So I actually think where we're heading is looking at more diversity in the profession, and possibly not just having a fairly homogenous workforce in the sense that people come with, you know, that library grad dip, but we'll see more people coming in from you know, IT, data related qualifications and fields, or people coming as second careers from, you know, other areas as well. And I actually think that will be, you know, a really useful thing going forward for us.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, totally. It is becoming, you know, there's a robotic collector of books. It's not an old world anymore in terms of libraries. So we got to need people who are, you know, able to facilitate and work with that. So yeah, great point there. We've no further questions at the moment. Sally, if you have anything, feel free to jump in there.
Yeah, I actually do have a question, because, you know, we often see on different chats and so on, or on Twitter or whatever, that people ask about or see that there's a need to do another qualification. You know, I've done my PhD, and now, particularly in the humanities, that people will say, well, now I have to do something else, like a grad dip in librarianship, to get myself into something. And, you know, I've seen different people who support PhDs. There's PhD to Life in Canada, and Inga Mewburn, the Thesis Whisperer, and so on. They go, no, you know, it's about getting experience. It's about understanding the value and, you know, what you have to offer. Like, you've unpicked your own PhD. As you say, it's not looking for a job about your specific area of study. So can you talk a little bit about what you see? That you've talked a little there, and I think that's really interesting. I'm always interested in the growth and changes within careers, because, you know, they're so dynamic, and the fact that growth of technical digital skills. But I guess, yeah, if you were talking to people in the humanities particularly, but any other PhD, do you see that as a need, that they have to go and do another qualification?
I wouldn't see it necessarily as a need. I mean, obviously certain professions have accreditation, and that was one of the reasons. For example, librarianship has a need for a qualification. So it was certainly, I think, also probably a bit of an accelerator. I think if I had tried to get into my career without doing the postgrad or the grad dip, I think it might have been a slower process and taken longer. But I don't think there is a need, really. I think the research, the knowledge, the transferable skills you'll bring from the PhD are very applicable. And if I'm really honest, what I actually learnt doing a grad dip, I rarely apply anymore. It's out of date. A lot of it was theoretical. I haven't catalogued a book my entire career. You know, I don't know the Dewey Decimal System, to be perfectly honest. You know, so that what I've gained is on the job experience, and that combined with those, you know, and sometimes we call them soft skills, enterprise skills, whatever sort of terminology you want to use. I think those are the real advantages. And the technical skills, the professional skills, I think are much more effective on the job. I think the key, the challenge is, you know, persuading your potential employer, finding ways that you firstly have identified for yourself what your transferable skills are, and having that skill to, you know, to construct a job application, to work in an interview, and be able to very, you know, clearly draw that line between, you know, my transferable skills, my enterprise skills, and how I'm going to apply them in this particular job. You know, I think it can be done. I don't think you need that additional qualification, but it, you know, it's probably dependent on everyone's individual circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. We feel for people who have already done a PhD, they've gotten through years and years, and it's like more qualifications. So I'm sure that'll be very welcome. You made a good point there about the job applications, and I have to say, I mean, I'm in Australia now 7 years, and the first time I applied to Macquarie, I was really blown away about the level of information required in a job application. Pages and pages and pages about, you know, how you've used your skill set, and I suppose the areas that, you know, you're using your PhD, you know, gives you lots of ways to say how have you project managed, teamwork, collaboration, all the soft skills, transferable skills that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. We have another couple of questions. Lee has asked, do you find it a little bit easier or more relaxable as a librarian than as an academic? I suppose talking about, or the opposite way, since I suppose academic work needs, Lee's phrase is brain work. I suppose the different skill sets required. I see a lot of what you do right now, I suppose people oriented, customer focused. Maybe you'd like to comment on that.
It's such a tough question. I mean, on hard days at work, seems like I wish I'd gone into academia and could just be beavering away writing some, you know, papers. But, you know, unfortunately, academia is also not like that, is it really? I don't think one is easier than the other, to be honest. I think they both have challenges, and I think, to be honest, those challenges are growing. I think, you know, academics have a lot of stress. You've got to balance your teaching, your research. You've got to chase research grants. You know, so there's a lot of stress there. Librarianship, you know, has the same issues. If you've got a very large community you've got to serve with diverse needs. They're not always easy to reconcile. There's a large staff. You know, there's budget constraints, all those things that, you know, are constantly coming up. So I'd say probably equally challenging and equally not relaxing.
Good stuff. I can totally see, you know, the challenges I suppose our academic staff face, and you know, all university staff I suppose are facing right now on both sides. So definitely good to understand, I suppose, what you're getting into, or you know, have a good understanding. Question again we have here is, did you network inside Macquarie before you applied?
You know, I actually did not. I did do a fair bit of research, though, on, for example, the people who were going to be on my interview panel. You know, obviously a lot of research into the library and Macquarie. So, you know, it was very much about understanding, or trying to understand as much as you can from the outside, how Macquarie works, both because I want to be the right fit for me, but also, you know, to be honest, I wanted, you know, to try and impress. I wanted the job. So I think, you know, it's really important that you can show that you've done that research into where you want to work, and you really, you know, customize your application. So I didn't really approach anyone beforehand, and that was actually a deliberate decision not to sort of lobby for the job. But I did very much make sure when I applied that it was very much couched in what I had learned about Macquarie, and very much, you know, trying to sell my experience and my skills with what I thought, you know, what I thought the direction of Macquarie was.
That's great. Yeah, definitely doing your research on what it is, you know, the organisation is about is definitely important. Just, I suppose, touching on, I've noticed from the career profile that you gave us before about how customer focused the role is. Can you tell us how you've learned those skills over time? You know, that kind of customer management, learning about what stakeholders want. Can you tell us a bit, like, because you do surveys, you do focus groups, the library is so focused on making sure that it's meeting the needs of its customers, students, staff, alumni. So maybe if you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, my early roles in libraries were client service roles. So it was, you know, it was information desk, it was teaching workshops. So I think that kind of practical grounding is kind of, you know, put into my head that is a key part of what we do and needs to be a focus. A little bit later in my career, I got very interested in user experience research and user design, mostly because I'd moved into roles which had a technology focus, and I was working on projects, you know, putting in new websites, putting in new library catalogues and discovery systems, for example, which obviously have, so I was working with IT professionals in particular, and really getting quite interested into that user-centric research approach. And so there's some, you know, there's some knowledge and skills I've picked up along the way there. But I think the thing about libraries is, you know, they're big buildings and they're warehouses for books, unless you make them about the people. So for me, it's really important. We're constantly getting feedback, and we're making sure what we do is meeting client needs and expectations. But I also think, you know, if you want to be really strategic and smart, there's an element where you're trying to get ahead of the client. They'll tell you what they think about your current services, but that it can be harder to find out, well, what would you like as a new service? Who would you like us to see? What do you really need? How can we imagine services that are going to serve you in ways you as a client might have thought of? And that's where I think, you know, some of those techniques around focus groups, for example, can really help you, because you're not just asking. Surveys are sort of reactionary. What do you think about what we're currently doing? They're really useful. But then also if you can get into more sort of focus groups, you can start asking, well, what would you like to see? And I think, you know, there's a lot there about sort of empathy and imagination of putting yourself in the role of the client, and thinking about how they might use your services and how you can improve them. And that's part of the really fun part of the job. It's part of the really rewarding part of the job. I think if you can see and hear that people are getting value out of what you're doing, that they're using the services, they're using the collections, they're using the spaces, and they're actually contributing in a very real way, hopefully, to people's research, to their learning experience. That's the reward of the job.
Yeah, I can see how if anybody's done any field work in qualitative research, you know, you're meeting with focus groups, that kind of work is really valuable and transferable. And also, just a second comment, I've noticed the Facebook page for library is really, really humorous. I love, actually, they really do try and get in touch with the people and how people are feeling. So kudos to whoever's looking after your social media accounts there.
I'll pass that on to the guys. They do a great job.
They do. Is there any more questions? I have to say thanks to everybody. Fantastic questions put in the chat. But if anybody wants to unmute and make a verbal question to Belinda, you're welcome to. While we're thinking there, Sally, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on, I wrote it down, personal ethics and cultural fit. For me, you know, having a background in career development for several decades, you know, the longer I've done that, the more I've understood. People talk about finding their passion, but it's really, you just have to live life and experience things, and then you find the purpose in what you do, and you can actually have a job and find purpose. You find it while you're doing it, but also it needs to fit with your values. And so you've sort of talked about that. Can you talk about maybe how you've discovered that that's really important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a something that's evolved over time. I don't think I definitely, you know, sort of sat down and thought, okay, what, you know, I have this set of values, librarianship matches that, so that's what I'm going to do. It was an evolution. Part of it was, you know, professional networking and my own, you know, professional reading, which brought me to greater knowledge of some of, you know, the underlying purpose of why do libraries function. They're there about the free flow of information. They're against censorship. They're about, you know, creating equal opportunity through the power of education and knowledge. So those kind of values over time, I think I came to understand the sort of the history, the values behind the profession. And then obviously to do personal reflection on, well, which of those really resonate with me? You know, and part of that was recognising I've had great opportunities in my life through education. I've, you know, received scholarships, which allowed me to do a PhD. I wouldn't have been able to do that without a scholarship, for example. So recognising, you know, that there's a core value here, there's a core purpose to what we're doing. And over time, sort of honing where my own personal ethics are at, how they resonate with the profession and the broader ethics of my profession. And then, you know, to be honest, I've been lucky as I've gone on with my career to be able to be a bit more choosy about where I work and to then really be thoughtful about, you know, do I want to work here? What is their values? Do they resonate? And, you know, fortunately, usually within academia, within universities, there are commitments to some of those core values, but everywhere does things slightly differently. So that became, you know, for me, as I said, I've been lucky. I've now got the luxury of being able to afford to choose where I work. That's not always the case. That certainly wasn't the case for me early in my career. But when you get to that point, it's very nice. And I think it's really important because you spend so much time at work. You want to believe in it. You want to like where you work. You want to feel like there's common purpose and there's something bigger than just turning up and doing the transactional part of your job. And that's, you know, that's what I get out of my profession. That's what I've got at Macquarie. And I think that's a really lucky place to be.
Awesome.
That's brilliant, brilliant. There is actually a research people might want to look up, Barry Schwartz, and he actually has a TED talk and a book, and it's Why People Work. And you've sort of explained that really well, that it's something bigger than you. And, it doesn't have to be massive. It's just got to connect with you. And so I think that's what, if everyone can find that, they'll be happy, and that evolves over time. So is there any other questions? Catherine, you got anything more?
I don't see anything further in the chat, but it's just reminded me to pop something in the chat before that came up in one of our last sessions about to actually find a professional job in Macquarie. Most jobs are listed here, but there are some casual jobs that do come up over time. I know it's a difficult time, you may not see as many job opportunities as there has been, but if you're curious about where to find professional jobs with a PhD, then you may want to look at that. I've no other further questions myself. Belinda, is there anything you'd like to add to it? Or, if anybody else has any other questions, we still have a few more minutes before we finish up. I know some of us probably want to, or some have to, and times higher education, as Sally said, for uni jobs. There may be some people running off to their 12 o'clock, but we have a few more minutes. Belinda, do you have anything further to add?
No, I think, but thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone. I hope it was useful. It's always delightful to have an hour to talk just about me. It's my favourite topic. Generally, I do hope it was somewhat useful to everyone. And if any questions come up after, you know where to find me. I'm in the staff directory. I'm in the library. I'm I'm pretty easy to find.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. We are very appreciative of your time today. I think we've thrown a lot more extra questions at you than maybe we had planned, but you've handled them beautifully, and thanks so much for your time. We have 1 minute. One last question do we have there just before we finish? It says to me, so we could possibly take it offline if you want to, if you have my email address, or you can pop it in there if we have a bit more time. To make oneself known to different sections at Macquarie. I think it's looking at maybe LinkedIn, if you've connected with people here today, and if you think that, you have like-minded, thoughts on working as a professional, you see people in the room here today that, you might want to connect with and know a bit more. I think if people use LinkedIn, I definitely would recommend doing that and getting involved and seeing what are maybe committees or organizations. Sally's mentioned Twitter there. I have to say Twitter is awesome for knowing people in the academic circles, and definitely connect with us there too. We want to hear from you. We'd love to, keep in touch with everybody, and please connect with us. So we might leave it there. So thanks everybody for coming again today, and thanks again, Belinda. Look forward to connecting with you outside in the real world.
Yeah. Coffee one day. I'd just like to add my thanks. And, for me, I've worked in careers for so long because I love hearing people's stories and learning more about the shifts that are happening in different, occupations and industries and so on. So, I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Totally.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks for organising.
Bye.
That's great.